What's the worst financial decision you've seen someone make? A friend of mine who is very bad with money and his girlfriend bought some sort of water filtration system from a door-to-door salesman. He has to pay something like $300 per month for this filtration system. He was all stoked because it came with a free set of pots and pans. Fast forward a year and his girlfriend has broken up with him, moved out of the house, and he's had to sell his home because he can't afford to live there. The water filtration system is now sitting in a storage unit where he still pays $300 per month for it because he's on a 2 or 3 year contract. Sorry, the details are fuzzy. We have great water quality in my area. I knew someone who got a loan for their wedding, but decided to blow it all at a casino. Now they have a loan for $20,000 to pay off and nothing to show for it. A coworker I used to have worked every second of overtime he could for several years to save up for a house. When he applied for the house loan, he based his mortgage payment on all of the overtime he had been working. I tried to tell him that wasn't a good idea, but he didn't want to hear it. He ended up divorced a few years later because his wife got tired of him always working. A guy in my fraternity got $30,000 for an undisclosed reason, I'm guessing a family death or something, and he bet it all on the Yankees winning one game. They lost. A guy who lived on my floor in the dorms inherited $100,000 from his grandfather's estate. He was suddenly very popular, buying all the beer, pizza, new car, golf clubs, etc. He was living large. His parents showed up about a month later to attempt to help straighten him out and recover funds. The golf clubs and other items went to a pawn shop, and they even enlisted the RA to help watch out for the guy. Terrible for an 18-19-year-old to come into that kind of money out of nowhere with no reference, or respect, for how to handle it or how it was earned. My maternal grandmother bought an 8-plex to avoid capital gains when she sold her large house. The apartment complex was in the red and needed a lot of repairs. She hired my father to do them and be on-site manager. The place started making money. My mom, divorced from my dad, was mad that my grandma bought it in the first place, then hired my dad, then was proved wrong because it was making money. My grandma was in her 90s and my mom pressured her for years, so my grandma finally sold it. That place is in a high market area and is now worth millions. My mom made a poor financial decision based on petty spite. A dude who owned a small convenience store in our town spent like $20,000 on fidget spinners. He was posting for like a year begging people to buy them as he would lose his business and his marriage was falling apart due to it. My supervisor took out a loan against their 401k to pay their rent because their credit cards were maxed. 2 weeks later, they bought a brand new $60,000 Lincoln with basically nothing down because her daughter just had a baby and I need a bigger car for that. Had a co-worker with 5 kids who could all go to USC for free once he has worked there for 15 years, even if he quit. He quit at 14.5 years for a job that barely paid more than he made at USC. Cost all 5 kids a free education at a top school since he couldn't wait 6 more months. Ran up credit card debt requiring bankruptcy. Once they were able to build credit again, 7 years later, they proceeded to run up a massive amount of debt again, but couldn't go bankrupt again, so they used debt consolidation. The debt didn't come from sudden expenses. They just needed to buy things to feel better. My coworker has $25,000 in anime figurines. He is in mega debt right now. When my ex and I lived together, he suddenly got super into figurines and model kits, to the point where our living room was full of them. On every surface. At one point I counted and he had bought more than 30 over the span of 6 or so months. The math worked out to him spending about $300 a week on these things. Thing is, we were both full-time students. He was paying for these with student loans. And I had to drive him around because he couldn't afford a car. But he could somehow afford these model kits and figurines and DoorDash for every meal. He even tried to keep living with me when I broke up with him because he couldn't afford to move either. I had no sympathy at that point. My ex had a brother who moved in with us and he was very much like this. The guy was a few years older than me, but he lived in our basement, ate almost exclusively Pizza Hut, had piles of boxes in the corner that were like 5 foot high, had a bare mattress on the floor, and spent all of his time playing video games and watching anime. He couldn't afford sheets or to pay rent on time, but he somehow always had new Gundam models. He was a nice enough guy, but he was such a loser that it made me re-examine my life and turn into an adult. The guy was like the ghost of Christmas yet to come if I kept being a slacker. I didn't want to be him, and I had a kid and a lot to live for, so it kind of shook me out of my depression and made me realize what my life could be like if I kept being a slacker. My friend bought a used Hellcat Challenger yesterday at 10.5% APR and $380 per MO insurance. He lives in my other friend's spare room. My roommate buys DoorDash almost every day. They'll maybe cook for themselves once or twice a week, but other than that they order food in 5 to 6 times a week. I know how much they make and I have not a clue how they can afford that. My brother's ex fell for a Craigslist scam. She found a motorcycle and the guy needed money up front to pay bills before she even saw it. We told her don't do it, it's a scam. She said she already sent $1,000. Of course, he was never available to show her the bike and we found out from my brother after they broke up she actually continued sending him money in hopes of getting the motorcycle. I think she was out $3,000 by the end. My ex-husband got cheated out of tens of thousands of dollars just by being an overtrusting and underthinking seller. He had always wanted a piano his entire life. And one day a friend's father had passed and left them an incredibly amazing and very old piano that she had no use for, so gifted to him. He loved that thing so much. Tuned it and fixed it up. Then a giant ball of tragedies struck that put us in very bad financial situation, causing us to no longer afford where we were currently living and having to move to his family's old home, which is off the mainland and on an island. Being that the only way to get anything moved was by ship and extremely expensive, he had to sell a lot of things. And much to his dismay, the piano was just too big and too heavy to afford to ship there. So he put out a listing to sell it for a very reasonable price. It was an antique, in spectacular condition, made in the early 1900s and was worth at the very least $80,000. He listed it for a fraction of what it was worth due to time constraint on having to get rid of it before the move. Someone contacted him and offered to buy it. And here is where he did something monumentally stupid. The buyer offered to have a truck come and pick up the piano in a very quick time frame and asked if it would be alright to give my husband $1,000 up front and then the rest in 2 weeks when they got paid. I know he was under a lot of stress, but damn, that was dumb. You do not let anyone walk away with an incredibly valuable item without it being paid in full. As I'm sure no one here is shocked by, the person never paid anything else on the piano and just disappeared. The money from that sale alone was pretty much all we were going to have to live off of until he was able to secure a new job in the new location. Scammers are truly awful and many people need to learn not to be so trusting. It's sad. But it's just how it is. My former sister-in-law had a thriving medical practice. She got so stressed that she joined the Scientologist and started taking their classes. She opened up 5-6 credit cards without telling my brother, maxed the cards out with hundreds of thousands in cash withdrawals, and gave it to that cult. Worked with a 50-year-old guy who looked like the bad end of a rhino and hated anyone not from England who sent £10,000 to his fiancée in Thailand he'd never met for a boob job, clothes, and flight over. Oddly enough, her naked pics and promises of anal when she visited stopped once the money had been sent. My awful aunt was the trustee for my grandparents' estate. When they passed, she decided to sell their house to a random realtor who put a leaflet on the door. To the realtor, not with the realtor. It wasn't put on the market, and the aunt rejected a matching offer by me after I argued hard to actually list the house and have people bid on it. The realtor slapped a new coat of paint on it and sold it a couple of months later for literally $1 million more than she bought it for. Many decisions around new tattoos or dogs when they can't pay rent regularly. My aunt says the rich get richer and the poor get another dog. I find this to be true for some of my family. Apply for a $5,000 loan, didn't accept quick enough so applied for another $5,000 loan, both got accepted and ended up gambling it all. A guy I dated for a short time had been joining a MLM scheme selling insurances. I listened to his monologue and told him I had no money. He was furious and tried to sell insurance to our waiter at the restaurant. He failed again. I'm still laughing today, he was no good guy. I bought a Hellcat when my old Challenger was paid off. I won't name any names, but a good friend who literally had it all, the high-rise apartment and a house down the street with a pool, sauna, casita, Hummer, Corvettes, a successful business, and about $400,000 in Bitcoin, threw it all away over a murder for hire, because him and his, non-related to any of the above successes, but from something about 10 years earlier before I knew him, got greedy, and no longer wanted to split their financial gain with a third person, so yeah. Hired someone on the dark web to carry out the crime across state lines, but communicated everything over text. All three men, my friend, his business partner, and guy they hired, have been caught and convicted. One received life in prison, and my friend and his business partner are up for the death penalty. Also, he was only 35 when he was originally arrested. My cousin spent 100% of her inheritance and took out a line on her home to buy a second home in the mountains. Thing is, it was being pushed over by a mountain, and they thought they could fix it. I went and seen it and every door jamb was crooked and the doors wouldn't shut. They took me down into the basement and they were trying to use I-beams to stop the mountain from pushing on the home. I was just like, what the hell are you doing? That won't solve anything. Fast forward 6 months and they asked me for $50,000 to help and I declined. Fast forward a year and the home collapsed and now they owe over $300K plus for a home that doesn't exist, and if they don't make the payments they lose their other house too because they used the original home as collateral and could not get insurance on the second home. Total money lost upwards of $700K. Knew someone who answered those scam emails thinking they would get rich. Last I heard, he lost around $50,000. Emptied out savings account and maxed out credit cards. Left in debt and had to move back with ailing parents. Not a close to them at all but more like a friend of a friend of a friend's cousin. This guy just would not listen. Genuinely thought he was going to be a millionaire. They kept stringing him along until the bitter end and then, poof. Biggest concern his friends had was him trying to milk his ailing parents for their last nickel and dime. Fortunately, he wised up and knew he'd been had. The last I heard of him was he had an hourly job somewhere and trying to get out of debt.